Good morning again, everyone. And also, hello to all of those people who are watching us online. Many times we have many more people watching online than we have in the room itself. So, hello to everyone. Well, we have a very interesting topic. I'm not going to say a very important topic, because that's going to become self-evident. And the topic this morning is how to find inner happiness in the midst of the stresses of life. And all of us have the difficulty of trying to navigate our way through a problem, a life that has different kinds of difficulties and problems in it. Sometimes there are illness, sometimes there are tests of an outer nature, sometimes there are financial things, sometimes there are all of these together. And at times, life can seem to get overwhelming. But a couple of things to remember. One is that we have chosen to come in to this incarnation. And having chosen to come into this incarnation, we've also chosen to learn some lessons in this particular life. Not all lives have all the lessons. It would overwhelm us if we had to learn everything, change all of the attitudes, all of the subconscious. Swami Kriyananda described them as subconscious caverns. All of those things that underlie our psyche and our consciousness. If we had to change all of that in one lifetime, it would be overwhelming. But generally speaking, we have one or two or possibly three important lessons to learn in this lifetime. How do we know what those lessons are? Well, you can generally feel when something is really important to you. That's one sign of it. Another is that if the same problem keeps coming back to you again and again and again, then that's the sign that there's a lesson that you need to learn in this life. And another sign is that if there is something that you're extremely attached to, but know that you probably is not something that's very good for you, that's another sign that there's something in that kind of global complex of feelings about that you have come into this life in order to release. So the stresses that we have in life are not necessarily a bad thing. There was a very interesting statement made by the great American botanist Luther Burbank. You know, Master, in the autobiography of a yogi, he dedicated it to Luther Burbank, an American saint. Well, Luther Burbank was a man who worked with plants, and he created many, many, many new species of plants. But he said one of the secrets to creating a new variety of a plant was that you had to put that plant under stress. So if there was a plant that normally grew in the sun, he would put it in the shade. If there was a plant that grew in sandy soil, he would put it in clay soil, and so on. And he purposely caused that plant to have stress on it. And when the plant had stress on it, then it went back into its, what we would now call its genome, or its DNA, and it began to withdraw tendencies that it might not have generally expressed. So a small plant in the sun, put in the shade, would gradually learn to grow taller, to reach up toward the sun, and so on. But the interesting thing here is that he said that in order to create new growth, you had to have stress. And so think of your life as the great botanist Divine Mother placing you in a position purposely in order to cause some stress. And so that stress is important for our growth, but if it is too much stress, then it's debilitating. It can hurt our health, it can hurt our mental health, and so on. But the key here is that when we're under too much stress, our tendency is to try to change outer circumstances. And what Divine Mother is trying to get us to do is to change ourselves. And so if you just change outer circumstances, if you always have trouble with your coworkers at work, and you say, oh, they're a terrible group of people, I'm going to quit this job, and you get another job, and you have trouble with your coworkers, and you get another job, and you still have trouble with your coworkers. Is the problem your coworkers, or is the problem your behavior? But if you react to the coworkers as if they're the ones causing the stress, and everything outside of you is wrong, and you've got to fix it, then you're down a street that is going to lead to a cliff over which you're going to fall. The farther outside of yourself you go, the less control that you have. That's a very important thing to understand. How many here, sitting here, think that you can control the weather? Raise your hand if you think. This is maybe a test for megalomaniacs. So, if you think you can control the weather, then raise your hand. If you can think you control national politics, raise your hand. Do you think you can control local politics? Raise your hand. Can you control the boss who gets angry at work? Raise your hand. Have you ever tried to control the boss? Have you ever tried to think about over and over and over again national politics or local politics, as if thinking about it, worrying about it, being angry about it would fix the problem? Well, if you think that, Divine Mother is going to pluck you up and put you in a situation where you can't control the outer circumstances. So that's farther out. How many of you think you can control the behavior of your own family? Raise your hand. How many think you can control the behavior of your spouse, your husband, or your wife? So everybody recognizes that that one's absurd. How about children? Can you control them? What can you control? Maybe a dog? So in America, they have amusing bumper stickers, and sometimes they're really quite good. I saw one that said, "I wish I were the kind of person my dog thinks I am." So, because dogs are loyal. So, the key here is that we can't control things outside of ourselves. So, if we think our happiness is dependent on circumstances outside of ourselves, how much control over our own happiness are we going to have? Virtually none. And yet, I would say that 99% of the people spend 80% of their effort trying to control things outside of themselves. And very, very few people really make a serious attempt to change themselves and to control their own emotions and their own behavior. It's as if, well, I just am subject to whatever moods come to me. I'm subject to whatever thoughts come to me. I can't control that. I'm just who I am. Well, we are not who we are. At least we're not who we are in that sense. We're not the ego. Let me talk a little bit about how the soul descends into this body so that we understand that. So, Master said that at the time of conception, the soul immediately comes in to that first cell that's formed by the sperm and the ovum. And so the soul comes in at that time. Furthermore, that is the area of the medulla oblongata. In yogic terms, we know that the medulla is the seat of ego. And so when that soul comes in, that first cell, the soul begins to form an ego. And then the medulla grows, and then the spinal column grows, and then gradually the rest of the body begins to grow from that central nervous system. The brain and everything else develops from that central nervous system. And so the body continues to grow for 9 months. Now, up until the time the body is ready to be born, there's hardly any sensory development. Now, the baby will hear things in the womb. And so to play good music or to chant slokas, to do something like that, that helps influence the baby. But there isn't very much. I mean, look at all the distractions that we have. The baby's in solitary confinement and doesn't have very much contractions. So then at the time of birth, Swami said that the horoscope should be taken at the moment the first breath. He said when there's the first cry of the baby is the time of the horoscope. Then he corrected it. He said actually it is the time of the first breath that allows that baby to cry. So that first breath begins the flow of energy in the outer part of the spine, the Ida and the Pingala. And that flow of breath, actually the movement of energy, movement of prana in the Ida and Pingala, but tied to the breath, that ties the soul to the body and to the senses. And so the soul now has come in, it has grown a nervous system, it's grown a body to carry that nervous system around, it has taken a breath to activate that nervous system, and it has developed the potential for sensory input, the five senses. It's all developed, but a little baby looks around and it's as if it's hard to even understand what's here. The senses are there, but the senses and the brain are not yet very well connected. Gradually, as the baby grows, obviously, the senses get more and more activated, and the enormous amount of learning that goes on in the first year or two in a child, and the brain the developments of the neurons and the connections. It's staggering. There are more potential connections in the brain than there are atoms in the universe. Isn't that a staggering thought? So there's enormous potential there. Gradually, we learn how to function, but as we learn how to function, all of that energy going out begins to make it seem as if the world outside of our central nervous system, the world brought to us by the senses, it makes it seem that that is very, very real and very much a part of who we are. In fact, many, many studies show that the brain selectively chooses what it pays attention to and not. So we don't really see the world, we see our version of what we think the world is. At any rate, the point I want to make here is that now our inclination is the energy comes in, the prana comes in here all the time. Master called this the mouth of God. When we do the energization exercises, remember he said we should feel the energy going from here to the various cells in the body. So the prana is always coming in, but generally speaking, that prana is going down the spine, both the astral spine and down the central nervous system, the spinal cord, and out into the world through the senses to connect us to the world. So there's a certain, in the Bhagavad Gita, Shakuni is a cheater at dice. Well, Divine Mother's a cheater. She has programmed it to make us think and make us connected outwardly. Now the yogi, which is who we're trying to be, has to reverse all of that process. In the Gita it says, what is night to the yogi is day to the worldly man, meaning all of that sensory aspect of the world and the entertainment and the diversion and the drama and the wanting this and not wanting that, all of that is day to the worldly man and night to the yogi. He wants to put that to sleep, and vice versa. What is night to the yogi, what is day to the yogi is night to the worldly man, meaning that the yogi awakens the inner spine, awakens the inner tendencies, and it has a specific way that it does that. A yogi has a specific way to do that. And so what we're trying to do as a yogi is to learn how to control our own energy. Now, if we can learn to control our own energy and our own feelings and our own moods and likes and dislikes, then we can choose to be happy all the time. We can choose to not let things affect us, even though they seem to be something that normally we would not want. So both Master and Swami many times would demonstrate the ability to disconnect their mind from pleasant or more likely unpleasant sensory input. So Swami one time went to the dentist, and the dentist looked at his tooth and he said, "Oh, it's all decayed. You need to have the tooth extracted, but you also need to have the root, which is infected. You need to have the root of that tooth cut." Now that's extremely painful. Swami often went to the dentist and told them just to drill, and because he didn't like the anesthetic. But here was something that was quite a serious dental procedure. And Swami said, "I don't want to take Novocaine." And the dentist said, "Oh, you can't do that. This is much too painful." Swami said, "No, I don't want to." And so he said the dentist was just sweating. He was so nervous doing this. Finally, he got the tooth out and the nerve cut, and he kind of proudly held it up, and the little nerve was wiggling around like that. In the meantime, afterwards, they asked Swami, "How did you possibly go through that?" He said, "Well, it's quite simple. First, there are kind of 3 levels to it, and this is a teaching, this is a technique for all of us." He said, first, if it's not very painful, not very upsetting, just concentrate. Just concentrate and ignore it. He said, usually I just do Hong Saw. And when I do Hong Saw, I just concentrate on the Hong Saw, and all of that fades back into the background. Then he said the second thing to do is don't define this as pain. Don't define it as unpleasant. Just define it as something that is happening. And so if you can change the way you react to it, then it changes the nature of it. Now, it's one thing to talk about that with a tooth. Let's talk about it with your angry boss who's shouting at you. Well, it's probably a little hard to do Hong Saw in front of him when he's shouting at you. So that's probably not the first technique to use. But don't identify that as something unpleasant. Just identify it. If you saw it on a television screen, it wouldn't seem unpleasant to you. It might seem quite interesting. That's because you're not identified with the character on the television screen. But if you disconnect the identification with the boss shouting at you, and you're not taking it personally, it's just someone using a lot of emotion and volume to try to make some point that I already know, and so you just accept it. This is what's happening. If you can do that, then 90% of the anger and 90% of the stress goes out of that interaction, and so on with all interactions. If you can distance, not become numb, it's not like you don't realize what's happening, not that you don't realize that he's behaving in an unpleasant and inappropriate manner. You realize that, but you disconnect from your personal likes and dislikes in terms of that. So that's the second level of dealing with unpleasant things. The third level, Swami said, was if that doesn't work, then go into the very center. He was talking about his tooth. If it doesn't work to just disconnect and just kind of identify it as a sensation but not necessarily pain, if it's too painful to do that, then go into the very center of the pain. And if you get into the center of it, it begins to fade and disappear. And so if you can't work with your boss by disconnecting, then go into the very center of that experience. And honestly, if you do that, the likelihood is that your boss is just going to not have any fun shouting at you and quit. Moreover, remember, you have been put into that situation in order to learn how to deal with somebody that is unpleasantly trying to be domineering. And for each of us, the answer to why may be different. Some of us need to stand up for ourselves. Others need to accept that other people have their own reality. Many, many possible lessons. But if you find yourself again and again and again in that situation, know that Divine Mother is putting you there in order for you to be able to learn a lesson, and in the learning of that lesson, to be able to release some spiritual bondage that is keeping you bound. And if it's something that comes again and again, and it's a really important lesson, you may have incarnated specifically for that. You may have come into this life in order to get yourself in front of angry bosses and angry people and others trying to be domineering, because there's something your soul wants to be free from in that freedom. Is there water? Thank you. And in that freedom then comes spiritual growth. And so a lot of stress, I would say that 80% of the stress that we have is not what is happening, but our reaction to what is happening. So if we have a highly reactive nature and we are constantly upset by the things that are happening to us, then that internal friction is going to create a lot of stress in our lives. And so if we want to get rid of that stress, if we want to find inner happiness, then it begins by, and it ends by, controlling our own reaction to that which has happened to us. This is the path of yoga. This is precisely what our path has been brought to earth in order to help us to do. Because remember I said at the beginning that the soul, the energy comes down the spine and out, and that creates all the involvement in the world around. When we meditate, Master said we meditate in order to reverse that process. He called each of the chakras searchlights, and their beams, when the energy comes down, the beams of involvement from the chakras go out, and they involve us in the world. And the more involved we get, the more energy there is that way. Our path of yoga starts with the techniques of pranayama. Prana is the energy coming down and it's going out. So our techniques are techniques to control that energy. It starts with energization. Remember, here the energy's coming in here, and unconsciously, for everybody in the world, the energy is coming in here, and it's going down and out through the chakras and out with the senses, and people don't have any control over that process, and they're therefore just victims of whatever is happening to them in life. And they're angry and upset and victims of life and so on. So our path is to take back that control. So energization teaches us to send the energy to body parts, and then through tension, but the tension, the sending of the body part, is only to stimulate our awareness of the flow of energy going there. So as we close our fist, in order to close our fist, the energy has to flow from down through the central nervous system out to the fist. And so if we do that under our control, we also learn to control the prana that's behind the energy of the nervous system. And so the energization exercises teaches us to send and relax and withdraw that energy. Send it and withdraw it. And by doing that, by learning to control that, it's the same thing when if we would apply it, it's the same thing when we have the angry boss in front of us. Instead of, I'm just a victim to this, we withdraw the energy because now we've learned to control it. We withdraw the energy from whatever personal involvement or our likes and dislikes that we have in the situation, and then we can face anything calmly. If you read the description of an enlightened person in the Gita, he's able to remain completely calm in the midst of friends or in the midst of enemies. That's because his calmness is dependent on withdrawing the energy into the central spine and bringing it up to the Vishuddha chakra. And so that's the center for calmness. So a yogi has learned to do that. It starts with the energization exercises. But the energization exercises, many people think of them, they're just calisthenics. I'm not interested in calisthenics. I'm not going to do them. Many, many people, perhaps the majority of people, learn the energization exercises and then don't do them. The first thing, if you want to be happy, is do the energization every day, because it's going to teach you to control your energy. Then the second thing on our path is the focus of the concentration, so the Hong Saw technique. In that, we're focusing here, and remember the breath is tied to the energy flow, and so by focusing, just observing the breath in a very calm, detached manner, at the point between the eyebrows, we are able to begin to withdraw that energy from the down and out tendency to bring it back and up. The Om technique does the same, and the primary technique of all is Kriya Yoga, where we bring that energy specifically under the control of our mind and our decision-making power. So our path is specifically designed to help us not only control the energy, but to deal with life. I don't know how a person that doesn't have a spiritual path manages to get through this world. Because if you're totally a victim and you think that what's outside of yourself is controlling you, and you think that you have to spend most of your energy trying to control it because it's controlling you, you're just in an endless loop. Just goes on and on for incarnations, honestly. And so this beginning of self-control is the solution to inner happiness. The more we can then control that prana, and the more we can control it in the reactions that we have, the more we can control whether we're happy or not. So now I'm going to give you 5 very simple techniques to control the circumstances and control your happiness. The first is, when you're in a situation that is either pleasant or unpleasant, but has you involved in it, and you can't dislodge that involvement, the first thing is control your breath. Remember, that's where the reactive process starts, is in the breath. So just stand there and breathe slowly and deeply in whatever the circumstances. In most instances, that will just change the energy and the outer circumstance will dissolve. So if there's something unpleasant going on, if you just breathe deeply, one of the techniques is regular breathing that we have. So inhale to a count of 8, hold 8, and exhale 8. Do that 4 or 5 times. And if you can do that, then you will begin to take control again over the prana. And in doing that, you can control how much involvement. So breathing is the first thing. Changing your focus is the second thing to do. So this works better if you're not in an interactive situation. This is working with your own thoughts and moods. So let's imagine that you're having a perfectly fine day. You're very happy. Things are going well. Beautiful day out. You're in lovely nature. And all of a sudden, you think of some insult that somebody said to you. The insult wasn't yesterday, wasn't last month. It was 5 years ago. But all of a sudden that thought comes into your mind, and now you're angry at that person. You're not paying attention to the beauty of nature anymore. Your mind is running on how you should have responded at the time, how you could respond now if they were in front of you, and you've completely lost your center, and you're angry. What do you do in that situation? So this is a very, very common situation. A mood has taken over your consciousness. A negative mood, or a negative thought pattern. It doesn't help to try to think your way out of it, because you're not going to do that. So the thing to do, and this is what I wrote my blog on, for those of you who get Touch of Light blogs, last Friday, this was the blog. So what you do is you just stop and you focus your mind, because that thought, that energy and emotion is beginning to get momentum. So you want to stop the momentum. So just stop and visualize as clearly as possible something. So if it happened here, stop and visualize as clearly as possible you walking from here to the dining hall. Seeing, there's a bench out there, and then there's a kind of a gate, and the pavement is done in a particular way, and there's that beautiful bush and beautiful. So visualize as clearly as possible for 2 minutes. That will end that negative momentum, whatever it is you're trying to stop. Then the third thing is to take that energy that now has been brought back under your own control. And if you're angry, think of something, think of peace, think of joy. Don't think of the person that you're angry about, because it'll just start it up again. Just think of something positive. Think of a turn. So the energy is going down, you stop it, you neutralize it, now you want to turn the energy back up. And think of the opposite. If you were angry, now think of how calm it is here, how beautiful, how peaceful. And hold that positive thought until it gains momentum. So that's a second technique. That's a 3-minute technique. So you stop, you concentrate on something that changes the energy. The first technique, the breathing, that's a 30-second technique. So you do Hong Sa, regular breathing for 4 or 5 breaths. This is a 3-minute technique. So you are able to stop your own negative moods and bring your own reactive process under control. The next is kind of I don't know what time to put on it. It can be quick or long. But the third way is, as we were talking, to consciously disconnect yourself from that which is upsetting you. And so you just consciously say, this, you can use affirmation, this is not going to affect my peace. I am not participating in this. I'm observing it, I know that it's going on, but I'm not allowing my reactive process to be involved. So you consciously make the choice not to be involved in that. So that's, I don't know how long that takes you to do. The fourth technique is a 15-second technique. Put your finger at the point between the eyebrows. Look into the light that you see at the forehead. And you can repeat, I am joyful. I am a child of God. I am joyful. I am a child of God. Do that for 15 seconds. Okay? And then the final thing is gratitude. If you are angry and upset and rejecting the fact that Divine Mother has put you in this situation, it's going to just continue the process. You've come here to learn that lesson, to learn whatever it is that you need to learn, and be grateful for everything that's come to you.
Good morning, everyone. I'll also share some thoughts on our topic now, finding inner peace and happiness in a stressful world. You know, it's very easy to think that these are the most stressful times that have ever existed on Earth. I mean, this age of technology and devices and instant communication, it's so easy to think, how could it ever have been more stressful? But think back on history. Think of even in medieval times, when Western history, I should say, when there were no devices, where the biggest technological breakthrough for 1,000 years was the invention of the wheelbarrow. And so you think, well, those must have been peaceful times. But there were times when plagues came and decimated 3/4 of the population. So every period of time on Earth is a time that has its own inherent stresses. And we, you and I, everyone alive on this planet today, we incarnated to deal with the specific stresses inherent in our times and to find peace in the midst of them. That's really the secret, that whatever your karma is, to be centered in the peace of it. Master said, joy is a battle for life is a battle for joy. Every step of the way, let me win that battle right where I am today. So with that kind of thinking, we begin to say, I'm not going to try to change things. I'm going to try to be a spiritual warrior, victorious. Our great Guru Yogananda was, if nothing else, a spiritual warrior. When you read about really what he was able to accomplish, leaving his beloved India with the culture of deep spirituality and respect for spiritual teachers and the reverence for the Bhagavad Gita, coming to the West in 1920. You know, in 2 years, 2020, it will be the 100th anniversary of Yogananda beginning his mission in the West. Incredible. But he came there in a time where there was no appreciation of subtler teachings. There was no appreciation or respect for people of spiritual magnitude. And with the power of his own peace, with his soul nature, he carved out, and it is still a kingdom of divine understanding and practices and appreciation for the teachings of yoga in a culture where it was totally foreign. And that culture that he started, the kingdom of that culture is still growing. And everywhere we go, and I mean throughout the world, we meet people who are, oh yes, I read the autobiography, and I've been longing to go into his teachings. His vibration is still going out. It's still changing people's lives. You know, here in India, the great, I don't remember his name, but he's the captain of the national cricket team. You know, he advocates autobiography of a yogi. He said this, he says this book helps you to awaken your own potential. So here we are in this age, which is not an easy time. When I first began studying Sri Yukteswar's writings about the cycles of the great cycles of the yugas, and we start with Kali Yuga, the dark age, where everything is defined by form, and then we come into Dwapara Yuga, the age of energy, and I thought, oh, this is wonderful. But then the more I began to understand the age of energy, this is a very stressful time to be in, because we have energy and intelligence and science at our disposal, but we don't have discrimination. So it's like we have a very powerful ship, but no rudder through which to steer it. And these great masters, Yoganandaji and our gurus, they came to give us that rudder. How do we find peace in this tumultuous storm in which we find ourselves? And think for a moment, I want you to do a little introspection. What does it feel like when you are stressed? What words come to mind in your own life? For me, it was things like pressure, constraint, determining my activities from a force outside myself, and unhappiness. You probably could add other ones as well. And then by contrast, what do we think of when we think of peace? Period of peace. We've all had them, even though they may be fleeting, but a sense of freedom, of relaxation, of self-determination, and of joy. Well, how do we begin implanting, as Yogananda used the wonderful phrase, the constant culture of steadfast peace in our daily life? The constant culture of steadfast peace. Peace is a choice. Happiness is a choice. Living your life with integrity and dharma is a choice. And we are asked to make that choice, these choices, every day of our lives. Will I let the pressures of other people erode my peace, or will I take that control in my own life? Will I let the demands of a dharmic world force me into action which I know isn't entirely honest? Or will I say, I stand my ground? We were talking recently with a friend who lives in Delhi, and he's a successful businessman who has 2 sons, grown sons. And he said, I deal in I have a business, but I also have real estate. And he said, you know, here in India, real estate sales are all done, part white money, part black money. And he said, I felt it didn't feel dharmic in my heart, even though everyone says that's how it's done. And I prayed to Master, please give me the strength to do it entirely above board, only with a check, no cash. His sons went ballistic. Father, you're becoming a religious fanatic. How can you do this? We'll lose our family money. And so our friend came to us and he said, I think it's the right thing, but the pressure is so great to compromise. And I said to him, what do you think God wants you to do? He said, I think God wants me to be true to my word. I said, I think you're right. I think it's more important to set an example for your sons of integrity and dharma than to give them the extra money that comes from these transactions. And he just, with tears in his eyes, he said, thank you. And so we're given this choice every day. Stress or peace, dharma or adharma. And we have to choose. We have to make that choice. And it takes willpower, and it takes commitment, and it takes calling on the grace of God to give you the strength to do the right thing at the right time. So Yogananda, you know, right now there's a wonderful movement with Sri Ravi Shankar, and it's a wonderful work he's doing, The Art of Living. But you know, Yogananda used that phrase, the art of living, when he came to America in 1920, and you find many of his lectures on the art of living. But he said, here are some tips, and I will give you some practical things to do to develop the constant culture of steadfast peace in your life. First of all, Master said, avoid negative thinking. If you are in a situation where someone comes up to you and says, I need this and this and this and this, and I need it in an hour, instead of thinking, that's impossible, it's unfair, how can he demand all this of me, he is such a impossible boss, you turn that around. What are the solutions? And we have been a part of the Ananda movement for 50 years. You know, next year is our 50th anniversary and the temple dedication. And we were, just as an aside, we were so touched by your gift for the temple. And when we have the temple dedication next year in coordination with our 50th anniversary, we will hold all of you in our heart at that moment. It is your temple too. Please believe me. So for 50 years, Ananda has been a demonstration of the power of positive thinking, of solutions. Why is that important? For many, many reasons. One, negative thinking pulls us down into a lower part of our brain, actually. They're doing research that negative thinking activates more rudimentary parts of the brain, the parts that are based on fear and anxiety. Positive thinking activates the more evolved parts of the brain where we draw solutions. And we could tell you so many stories. Here's one that comes to mind. In the early days of Ananda, we were trying to purchase the land where Ananda Village is located. And we never had any big income sources. It was just whatever we could, Swami mainly, earn by his teachings or our small businesses. And finally the day came when the people we were purchasing the land from said, you haven't made your payments, we're going to take the land back. This was rather stressful. This was 3 years into very hard work to try to develop this. And instead of negative thinking, oh, why aren't people doing more? Why? Swami just said, I must come up with a solution. And he just went and in a state of, Lord, give me a solution. I need it now. He immediately thought of several people that he could ask might loan him money. One woman he called up and she said, you know, I just received some money from a repaid loan I wasn't expecting, and I was asking God what I should do with it, so here it is. And in a stressful situation, don't be overwhelmed by it. God gave you that situation to find a solution, and the solution is there, and it will be found in positive thinking. Second, so avoid negative thinking. Look for positive, superconscious solutions. Second, avoid worrying. Master said, go on worry fasts. And this is actually quite fun when you get the hang of it. So when worries howl at you, as Master says, drown their voices with turning that around. Master said again, worries are positively eradicated this is where he used that phrase, in the constant culture of steadfast peace. So worries, it is a choice under our control. I can be eaten up by these worries, or I can suppress them, that's not the right word, or I can transcend them by positive thinking and controlling my thoughts. I think it was Haridasa's mother, he's probably shared this story. She was a wonderful woman. We had met her in America. Very loving, very beautiful soul. But she would worry often. And one time something was about to happen and she was worrying about it, and then it didn't happen at all. Which, haven't you found that to be true? 90% of the things you worry about never happen. And so after this big worry came and went without ever really making an impact, Haridasa's mother said, I wasted a good worry on that one. And so just to remember, we can turn off that energy that flows to that. A third point in finding peace in a stressful world is Master stressed often, that's the wrong word, Master spoke often of the need for a balanced life. So you need to build into your life ways to relax, whether it's reading or creative projects, painting, enjoying time with your family. All over the world, it's so sad. You see families sitting together and they're all looking at their cell phones. At dinner, have no rule, no devices at the table. And talk to each other, laugh together, be together. I have to share something of which I know it's not right to be proud, but I am very proud of myself right now because I've always been a little bit afraid of swimming. And we were recently staying somewhere that had a pool, and there was a woman there. I watched her. She was just swimming so beautifully. I thought that must be the most beautiful experience in the world. And then I noticed she was a swimming instructor. And I went up to her and I said, someday I would love to take a lesson from you. And she was a very strong woman. She said, what do you mean someday? We'll start tomorrow. And I began taking swimming lessons from her, and I learned how to swim. And thank you. It was the most freeing. I know, so much of what we do is problem solving, public talking, so forth. Swimming, it's really, and there was another woman learning at the same time. Her lesson was before me. She was a young lawyer, Indian lady, and she was about 35 years old. She said, I was petrified of swimming. And she said, I do it and I come back from my job and I just can relax. So I don't sell swimming pools or anything. I'm not trying to push that. But find whatever you can. It's not unimportant. It is as important as the time you spend at the office, at the time you spend at work. Find things to do that innately relax you and are enjoyable. And don't I have to do my work, I can't talk to my family. That is not a right trade-off. As I saw a quote that said, no one ever died with the thought in their mind, I wish I would have spent more time at the office. So, isn't it true? So, to find things that are innately relaxing to you. And then to understand, as Jyotish was saying earlier also, that everything that comes to you is the opportunity for you to transcend that test. I want to read a beautiful quote. Where's Anjali? Is she still with us? Ah, these are, Anjali gave me these new glasses, and so I'm demonstrating them, how they work, so well they work. So Master says, toil and struggle are the norms of life on earth. They are blessings, not misfortunes, for they provide us with a testing ground for our inner development. As we hone our peace of mind on the abrasive surface of outer difficulties. Isn't that wonderful? Honing our peace of mind on the abrasive surface of outer difficulties. And that says it. If that's all we said this morning, I think you would get something of value. On the abrasive surface of outer difficulties, we develop the clear discrimination with which to slice through to delusion's heart. Eventually, we arrive at that blessed state where the very luster of our peace protects us during all activities. So look at all the circumstances in your life and realize even the worst of them, they are the abrasive surface to hone our unshakable peace. We have to take control. We can't expect the world to provide us with the inner consciousness that we're looking for. In fact, it will be just the opposite. The world will challenge us according to the lessons we need to learn. And as we bring forth the energy, then we are able to develop our peace so strongly that it's a protective aura all around us. And then finally, meditation. Without meditation, how can there be peace? That's from the Bhagavad Gita. Without meditation, we have to experience that peace first within us, no matter what's going on. So many times we have seen Swami Kriyananda, our beloved teacher. You know, I'll just take a little aside here. I'm going to write a blog about this. It came to mind this morning. There was a phrase, a gift that keeps on giving. And Swami's training of us was a gift that keeps on giving. And I remember things that he said decades ago that now I'm understanding the gift he was giving to us in that little comment, in that little gesture. So it is with the Guru. Attunement with the Guru is a lifelong gift. It is not meant to constrain us or to discipline us or to punish us. The gift of the Guru is freedom and peace of mind and unshakable joy. And if we can, through meditation, begin to reside always in the constant culture of steadfast peace, then everywhere we go, we walk in an aura of peace. Meditation helps us to take control of the reactive process, of the restless mind, of the ability to not be able to see the meaning of the outer circumstances of our life. Meditation gives us clarity and focus and self-control, inner self-control. And I just will close with this beautiful quote again from our Guru. And our thought for all of you to take away from our morning together is that you can always, in times of stress and tests and challenges, and they will be there, no doubt. Those are gifts from God. Embrace them and go call on the grace of God and Guru, and they will see you through. So our Guruji says this about meditation. A diamond retains its strength and clarity no matter how many waves crash down upon it. The man of inner peace, similarly, his consciousness made crystalline by inner calmness, born of meditation, retains his equanimity through even the storms of mighty tests. So meditation gives us that crystalline consciousness that reflects God's light everywhere we go, and we see only God's joy, God's peace, God's light in every circumstance in our life. And we hope that each of you can begin to practice these things. They will change your life. They will improve your life immeasurably, beyond what you can imagine. But you have to make the choice. I will do this.